Hello, and welcome to the eTech podcast with me, your host, Ryan Maughan. I have been involved in the development of electrified vehicles and machines since 2005 as an engineer and a business leader. This podcast is the product of my passion for electric and autonomous vehicle technology. I'm here to share knowledge from some of the world's leading experts, as well as my own insights. Join me as we accelerate the transition to cleaner, safer and smarter vehicles and grow the industry around the world. So welcome to today's episode. We're here with someone who I saw speak at an event recently and was really fascinated by this massive project they've been involved with. And I asked her if she would come on the podcast and talk about it. So I'm really pleased to welcome Claire Miller, who is the Director of Technology and Innovation at Octopus Electric Vehicles, which is part of the bigger Octopus Energy group. So welcome to the show, Claire.
Hi, Ryan. Good to be here.
Maybe if we could start out just by learning a little bit more about you and your background and kind of how you came to be doing what you're doing now, that would be a really good starting point. Thank you.
Yeah. So I am a mechanical engineer by training. I went to Imperial, did Mech Eng, and I then went into engineering in technology and R&D consulting. So I did that for a few years. So I got to work on loads of different technologies and projects in the UK and around the world, actually. And that was
Cool.
lovely. And then I left there and did that freelance for quite a lot of years. Again, like kind of jobbing engineer, I guess, going around helping companies and improving processes and saving projects that were going a bit sideways. So that was cool. And during that period, I worked at a company called AlertMe, which was an early Internet of Things company, which ultimately became Hive. So you might have heard of Hive in the home.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was head of delivery at AlertMe at the startup stage, where we had some really cool tech and we're working out what the product should be and how we should bring that to customers.
Right.
So fast forward to the very start of 2019, and I spoke to Fiona Howarth, who's the CEO of Octopus Electric Vehicles, and she said they were doing this project and they'd put in a bid to the Bayes Innovation Fund for V2G, and they'd been awarded the project, and now they were trying to work out what technology they needed, hardware, software, how the consortium was going to work, and how they were going to find customers, and really, did I want to come and get involved with leading that. So for 3.5 years, I've led on vehicle to grid and brought that to its fruition. And then during 2019, we were having conversations about what should Octopus Electric Vehicles be. They've been around for a couple of years, doing lots of education and lots of interacting with the public, and decided that there was a role for me, a broader role in the business, which ultimately has become heading up tech and systems. So all of our digital experiences and our internal systems and all the things you need to run a vehicle leasing company. So
Wow.
yeah, it's been a busy few years.
And this is quite unusual. I mean, there's not many energy companies have vehicle companies sort of tucked onto the side of them, although Tesla became an energy company from being a vehicle company, but a different kind of energy company. But I don't... Are there any others in the UK that have that sort of model where they also have the vehicles business as well? I don't think there are
there.
Are there?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
Wait for this podcast to be published, and I will have loads of emails pointing out the company that I've forgotten afterwards. But no, it's quite an unusual and innovative business model in itself. Could just tell us how that works, basically?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Octopus Energy. When Octopus Energy was founded, Greg and Stuart and James, who were the three founders, had this vision for doing better and disrupting in energy. And so that's making it better for customers, making it really simple, making it easy, making the energy green, so making sure it all comes from renewables, and using technology to enable all of that to happen. So as the different parts of the group have been formed and grown, and there are other businesses, all of those, I guess, those founding principles, sounds a bit stuffy, but those ideas are at the heart of all the different businesses around Octopus. So the idea of having Octopus Electric Vehicles is really, I think, bringing together transport and energy, and those are two massive shifts in our society and in in the way that we're going to think about our lives as we go forward. So until recently, you've had to drive to a petrol station or fuel station, putting in petrol and diesel into your vehicle, and that has been a completely different like exercise
Yeah.
to what helps you turn on the lights and the kettle at home.
Yeah.
Now those two things are coming together. So yeah, I think it's thinking about the convergence of transport and energy, and it makes good sense to have businesses and people in those businesses that understand both those worlds, so that we can bring innovative, useful products and services to customers that actually make a huge difference in terms of all kinds of topics around greening the grid. So
Yeah.
reducing the amount of fossil fuels we need to burn and increasing the amount of renewables on the grid. It totally makes sense as we start to move forward.
And just in case people didn't realize, Octopus actually operates like leasing electric vehicle leasing programs, don't you? So you kind of
Yeah.
provide we can lease a car off you.
Yeah. So when we were starting out into 2020, brilliant timing. I'm sure lots of people have got these, brilliant timing. You start off 2020 with
Yeah.
plans to do one thing in one direction, and they completely change and stop, and off you go in a different direction. And so we were working on a salary sacrifice product, and salary sacrifice in the UK is a really attractive way of getting an electric vehicle at the moment. So the UK government realised that if they drop the amount of tax that's applied onto cars that are taken under this scheme, which is giving up a bit of your salary before you've paid any tax or national insurance,
Yeah.
makes it a lot cheaper. They drop that tax rate they then put back on to 0%. And so we could see there was a brilliant opportunity here to get as many people as we could into cars through their employer. So we're working on that product, getting ready to launch it. And we were learning that actually the more of that customer experience you can control and direct, like the better it would be, because we do a really great job at customer experience. We do a really good job at looking after people. So
Yeah.
so the leasing company was formed through 2020. And so my summer of 2020 was sitting right here actually, building systems and architecting the different solutions that we'd need to run a leasing company, whilst others were out looking for like the first funds to be able to buy the vehicles and various other pieces of the business. So that yes, we'll be operating as a leasing company. So now we have salary sacrifice. We have over 1,500 companies signed up so far. We've got some big names like Dyson, you might have heard of.
Yeah.
And then we have got close to 250,000 employees on that. And then recently we've developed a personal leasing product as well. So we're starting to trial that. So so we are so it's great. Yeah, it's amazing actually to think back of how far we've come in such a short amount of time, how many companies and how many employees can possibly benefit from our scheme.
Yeah.
It's it's very pleasing. It's really nice to see that starting to pay off. And actually the most pleasing thing is that all of those people are going to be transferring into an electric vehicle, taking those, taking that car off the road that was kind of polluting the air and was obviously using fossil fuels. So it's a really great place to be.
Fantastic. I was just thinking that like that's a lot of new EVs coming into the road, and you've kind of made it easy for people. Like in the early days of EVs, the early adopters were all people who could probably organize all of the infrastructure stuff and like the plethora of different network cards that you needed to charge up and sort out your home charging sort of stuff, blah blah blah. But actually, I know other people who tried to do that, and it was all quite difficult and complicated. And actually, I kind of I get why having a single provider that kind of just makes it all seamless and easy, would be a big benefit. And I think some of the bigger companies that were in that space weren't doing such a great job either. So yeah, really, really good to see you guys come in and disrupt. But so then the real sort of the meat of the podcast was this big project that you mentioned with the vehicle to grid exercise, and that just blew me away in terms of the what you've done on that project, the scale of it, and what you were trying to do there. So tell us more about that project, please.
Yes. So it was called Powerloop, and Powerloop was conceived, as part of the BEIS sort of innovation challenge around vehicle to grid. So back in 2017, in fact, I think it was first spoken about.
Wow. Okay.
And our ambition was to take part in this this challenge, to put together a consortium to access some part funding, and to really work out what would it look and feel like as a customer to go through that process of having a vehicle to grid system at your home. So what did it feel like to have it fitted? What did it feel like to live with it, to experience it? The reason we wanted to do that was to prove it was possible, to provide an example to others that this is the future, this is what's going to happen, and to also improve every step as we went, if we possibly could. So the premise was we would recruit 135 customers who would have a Nissan Leaf, and they would lease that Nissan Leaf. So as we were learning about being a leasing company, it was a perfect time to build that out through the project.
Yeah.
Then we'd work with our group company, another one of our group companies, Octopus Energy Services, to actually assess the home and to install the charger, the special charger, bidirectional charger, which allows the energy to go backwards and forwards into the vehicle and the house,
Yeah.
and ultimately back on the grid. And then get permission to do the exporting. So we worked with one of the DNOs, the distribution network operators in the UK. So those are the companies that own, operate, and maintain the cable from your home up to the substation level. So those sort of like the local road network of the energy system. You know, if the national grid are the motorways, the DNOs are looking after like your local area roads. And actually they have to give you permission to put this much back on the grid. There's a whole process there that we worked with UKPN. So we worked with one DNO to really hone it down with them. And then they are, through the Energy Network Association, spreading that out to the other DNOs. And then the other part is flexibility.
Yeah.
So flexibility is something that's been going on for many years in terms of helping the national grid balance its load and demand. And actually, until kind of recently, it's been a very kind of big lever that can be pulled to turn factories and large kind of energy using businesses on and off. So get them to turn on and off to actually balance the amount of energy on the grid. So actually, one of the main things we wanted to get to with vehicle to grid was to have a way of demonstrating that when you have not just 135 cars that can put energy back, you know, out of the car battery, back into the home and onto the grid, you have that at scale, 100,000, a million cars that could do that in the future. What could that do in terms of helping the national grid, so the national scale, and also more locally? And the reason there, and this is the bit where I mentioned earlier, you know, transport and energy come together, is thinking about your car is your way of getting around. It's your mobility asset, if you will. It's the way you get around. But it's also a battery on wheels when you've got an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
So there you go. So vehicle to grid is about thinking about your car in a different way as a customer. And it's about how does that help the grid do more with what we've got right now? Because this, my final point on this is, you think more broadly, as we start to decarbonize the grid, decarbonize transport, and actually heat is massive.
Yeah.
You know, heat is even bigger in terms of decarbonisation target than transport. Our grid's going to have to provide more energy, and it will have to expand physically.
Yeah.
If we can start to use EVs and other batteries and things at home, it can help use what we've got now more smartly.
Distributed storage, and it's quite acute. I mean, obviously at the moment, energy prices are like a horrific nightmare roller coaster because of external global factors. But we've got this situation, which I always think is a little bit odd in the UK, but I do kind of understand why. But the sort of cost of electricity is set by the highest generating cost at any one particular point in time, which slightly sort of perversely now is that we're going to more kind of renewables and non-fossil and particularly non-gas based generation, but we've got the price of gas driving it, and the gas is mainly peaker plants and stuff like that. But you could take out that sort of thing from the system if you got vehicle to grid working. Your peaker plant could be your vehicle to grid system, like a virtual power plant.
Absolutely. You know, that's such a good point. The way that renewable energy prices are having to follow the gas price at the moment is absolutely spot on. It's a real challenge. And actually, our energy customers get in touch and say, hang on, you're a renewable energy company. You only sell us renewable energy. So why are your prices so high when we know that renewable energy is cheaper to produce? It is cheaper to produce.
Yeah.
So there were some comments from the Prime Minister actually last week on the Radio 4 Today programme, actually speaking about this
Yeah.
and saying that it seemed a bit bonkers.
Yeah.
So interesting to hear the Prime Minister mention it, because I think a lot of people in the industry been around a lot longer than me have thought this is an interesting and sensible thing to explore. So yes, very interested to see where that goes, and hopeful. I think there's a bit of an open question about if you're not paying the price to gas prices, which is obviously like a physical commodity, where do you then kind of get that baselining? But great, the door's open to have that conversation. So that's really exciting. And yes, to your point, peaker plants are what supports this evening peak. So everyone, and now we're out and about again, which is wonderful to be able to move around in the world.
Yeah.
The way that we, on average in the UK, use energy is you can follow a sort of graph of the day. People get up, there's a little peak in the morning, then people are often out of the home or working, and then when they return in the evening, or they come out of their home offices and go and get ready for dinner, then you can see the energy, that graph starts to rise, and actually lights, cooking, kettles, all these things start to get switched on. And at that time, to meet that quite rapidly increasing demand, we burn gas in peaker plants, to your point. So on our project, we were able to show, and we are continuing with it. So vehicle to grid is now part of what we do at
Yeah.
Octopus, which is really exciting. Is we send signals to the vehicles that are plugged in at that time, and we get them to export some of their battery energy back into that person's home, and then it goes out of their home. The bit that remains after their home has consumed it, and that's important because their home becomes neutral, because
Yeah.
anything that they're using gets met by the vehicle, by the energy coming from the vehicle.
Yeah.
And then the energy that goes back onto the grid is actually then helping to support the grid, because it's taking away a little bit of that demand by a bit of battery from that, a bit of energy from that battery from that vehicle. So again, thinking at scale, we did some sums and we worked out, if you have 1 million cars doing that for an hour, that would be the equivalent of 5,500 onshore wind turbines. And if you follow the challenge we have around building wind turbines, which we very much need more wind, let's build more wind.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, we have some challenges there around the process of planning, getting permission to put a wind turbine, even when the local community are very keen for it, and there's a landowner who's very keen to build it.
Yeah.
It can still take 3 years. So another part of Octopus is pushing to reduce that, and lobbying to reduce that. So vehicle to grid, as we start to see the number of cars expand that can do vehicle to grid over the next few years, is a really exciting way, I think, a really exciting technology that's coming to help reduce the amount of peaker plants that we need, the amount of gas we need to burn at tea time.
And it's only because I think a lot of people think that the sort of common objection to even when you were talking, I think the questions were along this, but other times a common objection is, oh well, I need the power in my car to drive, and I don't want to give it up. But you sort of explained very well how that side of it works, because it's not actually a huge amount of power you're taking out of the car, is it? It's or energy rather. So you're not like flattening the battery. It's like a very small bit of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. We think about it, the most simple way of thinking about it is state of charge. So for anyone that hasn't driven an electric vehicle yet, please try to. Please get out there and try and get in one and give it a go. And on the display, you will be shown a percentage. So the percentage that remains in the battery at that time. And what we have done with our system is to make sure that we have a minimum threshold, 30%. So the battery will never be drained below 30% state of charge.
Yeah.
Now, what that means is you'll always have enough to go to the shop, maybe pop out in the evening. Maybe if you did have to go somewhere in an emergency, you've always got some battery remaining. So that's our way, I guess, our guarantee that customers can trust that there'll be some battery. And in terms of the amount, you think about, you've been using your car during the day, and when you return home and plug in, most most people won't have a very high percentage state of charge necessarily. So it might be you plug in at 60%, and then the signals come and it goes down to 40% or 30%. So no, it's not huge amounts, but this is about demonstrating at scale. You have thousands of vehicles doing that. It's really valuable to the grid. So yeah, and the other part is that, yeah, you're right. People often say, hang on, I've just put energy in to drive the car. Why would I want to take it out again? And the piece of the puzzle there is it's a small amount of the battery when you're actually already parked up at home and probably not planning to go out, and then we top you back up. And that's also super important in this like shift of mindset is we charge the car overnight, and the system that we have in place now, Crack and Flex, which is another part of Octopus, we can expand on that a bit if we want to, is actually the system which controls the scheduling of the charging. So this system is sending messages to the car, to the charger, to say, okay, start charging, stop charging, and start discharging, stop discharging. And it's making decisions on when to get that energy out of the battery and when to put it back in again, based on grid conditions and signals from the grid. And what I mean by that, well, actually that platform, that computer platform, is actually also talking to, inverted commas, taking data from the grid, which is sending information about when there is a high load, when energy will be needed on the grid, and also when there is actually a high supply, and so when the grid needs somewhere to store energy. So if we're building up this picture of an integrated grid and energy system, our Crack and Flex platform sits in the middle. Looking at what the grid needs, looking at what the local area needs, and that will come, and it's developing all the time as the DNOs are developing pricing signals and demand signals. Those messages will be integrated into Crack and Flex more and more. And it makes a decision based on those grid signals what to do with that battery on wheels. Now, as a customer, we have an app, and in the app, you can set how much state of charge you want in the morning, so what percentage you want it to be topped up to, and what time you want your car back. And those constraints help Crack and Flex to make a plan on when it will do that discharging and charging.
So there's a lot of intelligence then going in to this. And is that the same system? Because even without vehicle to grid, Octopus kind of do a lot of, I don't know what you call it, you sort of flexible pricing, where if you charge off-peak times, or if you use power off-peak times, you get very low or even sometimes negative pricing. So you get paid to it's the same engine that drives that sort of thing?
So actually not. Interesting. So we have, so there's another system called Kraken. I know, there's two. So good, we built two. So Kraken was the original, and you mentioned,
it took me quite a long time to work out, by the way, that it wasn't crack on as in come on lads, crack on. It was Kraken as in the mythical sea creature.
You're right.
Should have been obvious, give the name of the company.
So the Kraken, unleash the Kraken. The mythical kind of enormous octopus beast. Yes, exactly. I think this is definitely one for I like it. I actually think it's both. So when I say Kraken, I often think like crack on. So I really love that. I love that you've thought of that too. Cool. So Kraken was envisaged and architected by James Edison, so the CTO of Octopus Energy, now Octopus Energy Group. And the concept is, how do you run an energy company for customers in a really efficient way, which lets the team at Octopus do as much as possible for that customer when we're talking to them and interacting with them. And so to give that great customer experience and to be as efficient as possible. So Kraken, again, another platform, so computer platform, it takes signals and data from different parts of the customer energy world to give one view of what's going on with a customer's account. And again, what I mean by that is it takes information about usage. So it's actually taking data in. If you've got a smart meter, then we're taking your smart meter data to look at how much energy you're consuming in the home. it also has things like billing, and it has telephone system. And so it has all the ways that customers might pay their bill, and then we can speak to you, we can take your phone call. So it has lots of different pieces, which make it super simple for that Octopus ops person, operations person, to help you. And whatever your query is, or whatever your need is, they can help you.
Right.
And the tariff, so the bit you were mentioning there about, different prices at different times, we refer to those as tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
And so the tariff that you're on is how much you pay. And so Kraken is so smart that it can understand the different times of day and apply a different charge to different times of day. So the smart meter in your home is sending data to a centralized sort of database, which then sends it on to us. It sends it every half an hour. So we get a half hourly reading of how much energy you're using.
Right.
And then, so we have 48 periods in a day. So half hours, so it's 24 hours times 2, so it's 48 half hourly billing periods. So in Kraken, we can design and build tariffs that charge you different amounts. So to your point, we have a variety of different tariffs, which range from a single cost all through the day and night, which is probably what a lot of people that are listening to this are on right now.
Yep.
It's pretty traditional, standard. And we know that those prices have been going up and up and up. So that's a huge challenge in itself. And
Yeah.
as a company, we have a lot of schemes and a lot of actually funds going in to help people who are struggling. So yeah, I would say if people want to have a look on our website, if that's something that they're thinking about, have a look on our website, and there's help there and there's information there. If you're looking for good tariffs for charging your electric vehicle, then we have these time of use tariffs. So the original was called Octopus Go. It was cheap period overnight, 4 hours of cheap charging, which is reflecting what we were mentioning about, sometimes there's quite a lot of energy on the grid, green energy, like the wind still blows at night. And so if there's a lot of wind, there's a lot of energy coming onto the grid. And actually right now, unfortunately, we have to pay a lot of money to not generate wind in certain places in the country. It's called curtailment. Billions of pounds, actually. It's quite shocking. And that is because right now we don't have enough storage. So batteries predominantly. There are other ways of, other storage technologies are available, but batteries are an excellent way to store energy. And we also don't have pricing signals that are very localized. So actually, it also, hopefully for people who are listening, starting to tie together around having batteries that can store energy from renewables, so that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, but we want to boil our kettles, the classic British example, we have that energy available. So Go was the first tariff for customers that encouraged them to use energy at night. We've then evolved that into Intelligent Octopus, which is now available, which is 6 hours of a cheap period overnight. But we are actually controlling electric vehicles. And so this is how Powerloop comes full circle to our tariffs, because we can send signals to vehicles overnight to get them to charge at the times that are going to help the grid the most. And by doing that and having that business model, we can then support an even longer period of cheaper energy for customers. And this is where Kraken Flex, which sends those on-off signals, talks to the grid signals, actually then combines with Kraken that does the customer tariffs and billing. Because if the grid sends a signal, or the market signal says it's really windy, like this evening, 10, 11 p.m., then the Kraken Flex system sends a signal to the electric vehicles that are plugged in and gets them to charge. So they're charging outside of that cheap tariff window, but Kraken is aware of that and will bill you at the cheap rate, even though you're outside of the cheap time window.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense? So you're basically using those vehicles as batteries to help and balance the grid. And as a customer, you get the benefit. So Powerloop vehicle to grid is now part of that system.
Right.
And so as vehicle to grid cars become available over the next few months and years, we have that service now ready to do the exporting piece, the discharge piece in the evening, as well as that charging piece overnight. So hopefully that sort of builds up that whole picture. I'll carry on. It's a very long answer. You probably want to like edit this and clip it, but
no, it's brilliant. This is, I mean, because it's a really, the energy system is one of those things. I think a lot of people just take it for granted, but then the sort of concept of actually there are all these different power plants and different energy sources, wind turbines, gas plants, nuclear plants, etc. There's all sorts of different things. Plus importing, like we've got a high voltage DC connector to Norway up in the northeast, and so there's all of this sort of input into this system, and then we take off dynamically from that. But the normal power, wind turbines, even you can't turn them on and off particularly easily. So storage, it's all about storage, really. Storage into the future. But building grid connected batteries, is really expensive, and that there are projects happening. And a really good friend of mine runs a company, Connected Energy, that repurpose batteries, and
they're so cool what they do.
Grid
super
stuff.
Cool.
But it's a long way off. But we've got this increasing fleet and infrastructure in EVs, and this sort of concept of, because again, like you don't even have to have local. So I mean, I don't have solar on my house at the minute. I'd love to put some solar on my house, but in this sort of case, it's just simple arbitrage of like this big dynamic inputs that we don't really want to turn them off. We use those and spread the load out, and there's so much capacity in the system already. Just by managing what we've got better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what I mean when I say we can do more with what we've got. And it is such an exciting concept, just thinking about all of these different generation technologies and storage technologies, and how we're shifting from this very traditional hub and spoke model where you have like a power plant which burns fossil fuels, which then pushes energy out onto the grid. We are completely disrupting that. It's a seismic shift to a completely different set of technologies, distributed storage and generation, and we need a whole market structure to go with that. So we're not just changing the technologies, we're changing physically how we're moving energy around, and we're changing how the market dynamics work. So again, bringing it back to what we talked about earlier, how do you decouple the price of renewable energy from the price of gas? Actually then starts to feed into also what I mentioned about more nodal pricing. So making the signals for where energy is needed versus where there might be too much being generated. At the moment, those signals are super high level, and actually making it more granular, bringing it down to your town, to your substation, to your street even, and being able to talk to systems like Crack and Flex and send signals dynamically is going to completely revolutionize the way that our energy system works. I can't tell you how it's exciting, it's thrilling, it's a little bit terrifying. It's going to happen over the next sort of 10 to 20 years of our lives. And vehicle to grid is going to play, in my opinion, a really important part in that. But all electric vehicles, smart charging them, which is this turning them on and off to charge at times which make them a storage capacity as opposed to just a car, is very, very important. And actually yesterday was the day that the smart charging regulations came in for domestic charge points. I don't know if you've come across that or heard about that. So the government has enacted legislation to make electric vehicle charge point manufacturers put in certain controls and behaviors into those charge points. And so for me, it's an interesting step. It's an interesting way of doing it. I think it's quite unusual for a government to enact specific technical requirements in this way. So mandating this must happen. It's not an option. And actually, what it means is that when you plug your vehicle in to one of these charge points now, it won't automatically start charging. I think it's a pretty sensible thing to do, because if you plug in at 5 o'clock when you come home, that is during that peak period when we already have a high demand. So that makes sense. It does some other things which are I think trying to mimic the smart charging I've just talked about, which is when you through these charge points, you can schedule a time at which your car starts to charge overnight.
Yeah.
Not linked to a system like ours just yet, and hopefully people will want to get involved, but just setting a timer, because you might have a cheap rate overnight. Now the charge points have to have a randomized delay so that they don't all turn on at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. They have a randomized delay. And I think this is the thing. So I think the thinking here is, at scale, when there's a million electric vehicles all plugged in, if they all turned on at midnight, because that's when the cheap rate started, that could be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
And them all coming on at the same time. Now, I think there's a really good news story here, which is, well, one, we're talking about it, so that's exciting. But the second thing is, smart charging and flexibility tariffs are here now with us at Octopus.
Yeah.
This intelligent Octopus, actually, it turns your car to charge when something in the grid has asked it to do that. So actually, randomized delay sounds a bit like Big Brother control, and it's giving up control. Actually, it's kind of a crude way of doing
the same thing.
The same thing. So I think it's an interim step. I think that these regulations will be useful for a few years, but actually we're moving to this world where you have flexibility on the grid, and you give up the scheduling, you trust your provider. And again, we're an energy supplier doing that. There are other players now coming into the market trying to offer that as a service.
Yeah.
And actually, you'll just get your car back charged in the morning, and it won't matter to you.
What's the I actually, as a sort of an early adopter of EVs, my charge point is ancient, white and green plastic box that many people will be familiar with. That I have had to repair for the known problem with. But I'd love to know, because actually one of the EVs we've got, we can't time the charging at all on. One we can, but how does your smart charging tariff talk to my car today? Or would I have to upgrade the box or something, or the car? Maybe this could be an excuse to buy a new car. Is it? Do I have to upgrade the car?
It's escalating, Ryan. This is escalating. You're like, so I had to buy a new car. So look, how do we talk? How do we send signals to the car or to the charger? So electric vehicles work in a connected way. And so each electric vehicle has a set of signals it can send to the outside world. So again, anyone who's got an electric vehicle, you may already have downloaded an app onto your phone or your tablet from your manufacturer, which can give you information about your car, and it can let you set certain schedules and timings on your car. So that infrastructure, that digital infrastructure, exists for each make and model of electric vehicle. So that's the kind of foundation to this. Okay. So what we're doing is, in Crack and Flex, we're building connections to each of those makes and models using that messaging system that exists already. So for anyone who's into tech or into coding, it's an API between the vehicle and our Crack and Flex system. And that means that's a way of passing messages and commands and information between the car and the system. Okay. So we're basically building out, as fast as we can, the different makes and models that we can talk to. So we started with Tesla, and we added brands like Jaguar Land Rover. We're working with lots of other manufacturers now, and also providers of APIs as well. So we're bringing on all the time different makes and models. So keep an eye on our website, have a look for Intelligent Octopus, because we're posting frequently the cars that we are adding. And then on the charger side, to your point about having an ancient charger, because we're going via the car, I think that for those people who do have a charger which works absolutely fine as a charger, but can't necessarily communicate with the outside world, we'll be bringing that whole range of EVs. In terms of other chargers that can do it, we're actually just announcing that OMI, one of the charger manufacturers in the UK, their wall-mounted charger now is fully integrated with Intelligent Octopus, which means we can send signals directly to that charge point, and that can send information back to us as well. Okay,
because that's kind of cool to be able to turn the charge point on and off, but then there's not all charge points could do that, although not most, but a lot of new ones are much smarter, and you can all sorts of clever things with integration with renewable systems and kind of
Exactly.
boiler controls and stuff as well. But so you've got that coming with the new one, and obviously the vehicle to grid though is a completely different. That is special hardware to do that. It's a very special box of tricks you need on your wall to facilitate that.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting times in vehicle to grid technologies. You're right. So with vehicle to grid, without the way that we do it, and the way that we did it on the Power Loop project, we worked with another wall box manufacturer called Wallbox. So another EV charger manufacturer called Wallbox. And when we started working with them, so one of my early jobs, and I started getting involved in 2019, was looking for providers of this special chargers, this bi-directional charger. And in fact, a colleague who was actually the author of the bid for Power Loop and was working with me at the time, Charlie Cook, who some people might now know, has gone on to found a company called Right Charge, which helps people find good tariffs for their EVs and good charge points for their EVs. So Charlie came across Wallbox, a Spanish startup company. And so we've had the journey with them all the way through this project of them going from being a small group of people trying to develop different products for home and on the street charging.
Yeah.
Some of the listeners might know they're now a massive global presence in charging.
Oh wow. Okay.
So that that's been quite interesting as well. Again, as an engineer, over my career, I've spent a lot of time in terms of hardware development and product development where you have to go through certain certification and testing. So kind of went through that with them around, getting the product tested and, test houses like TUV, for example, like certification test houses to get electrical and electronic equipment certified. So it's really interesting looking back. Every part of Power Loop project was about developing something new or bringing a new part of the system, which in itself, again, engineers, you want to try and build on something that's stable. And actually everything we were building was built on something else that wasn't quite finished or ready or new. So they developed this special charger, the technology that enables vehicle to grid at the moment in terms of practically getting the battery to give up the charge and let it go back through the charger into someone's home and onto the grid, is powered by something called Chademo. So Chademo is the original vehicle to grid standard. It's a combination of a special gun connector that actually connects the charger to the vehicle and a software protocol which allows messages to be communicated. So we needed a charger that could do Chademo. And we needed a charger that could do the inversion, so changing the alternating current that comes from the grid into direct current, which can be accepted by the battery. So
people, I think that's sort of an important point. A lot of people wouldn't realize that the battery in the car is DC, the grid is AC. Normally, when you plug into a charge point at home, you're connecting actually to the AC, and the car has an onboard charger on it, OBC, which converts AC into DC in the car. But that's not bi-directional. Typically, it can only work in one direction. When you plug into a rapid charger at a motorway services or whatever, you're actually connecting directly to the battery DC. So the big sort of telephone box of tricks in the there is converting the grid AC into DC, and then that's going down. And the two big fat pins at the bottom are the DC direct connection pins to the battery. But the sort of issue with vehicle to grid being that we've got to do that AC to DC conversion somewhere, and it's quite complicated and a lot of power, to do that, and you're doing that off the vehicle. So it's very different to a normal, the normal kind of home charge point is basically like a socket with a fancy bit of electronics control to make sure it doesn't turn on when it's not meant to, but it's pretty dumb other than that. Whereas this is like a very sophisticated bit of kit.
Yeah, it's a very nice, power electronics is, it's a really nice bit of power electronics. So the way that the Wallbox Quasar does it is uses a silicon carbide chip, which does generate quite a lot of heat. And so actually, if you ever see one of these chargers, it's got mostly heat sink. So it has this lovely, heat exchanger. Heat exchanger, heat sink with fins. And then in the middle is a little square box, and inside is a PCB, and inside there is a silicon carbide chip. And actually, it's super clever, as you say, transferring that AC to DC. And the reason it does it off board the car is that's the way that the Chademo system has been conceived.
Yeah.
And so you're absolutely right. The next generation of vehicle to grid will, and like the technologies in the car, will not be Chademo. It will use the CCS connector. So you alluded to it, I think, there when you mentioned the 2 pins, the DC pins. This is great. This is exactly how I describe it. So for those people who like haven't got an EV yet, or maybe have got an EV but are used to using a simple connector at home, that's a Type 2 connector. So Type 2 has become, like, I guess, the prevailing standard. The Type 2 connector with you can't see me. I'm using my hands, a classic, like engineer describing these with my hands, like waving my hands around frantically. So the Type 2 connector at the top, and then 2 large pins at the bottom, the DC pins. Together, they become a CCS combined charging standard. And so the CCS connector is what will enable vehicle to grid in the future with another software standard, which is ISO 15118. So that sounds very geeky and technical, and it kind of is. It's been a long time coming, and that software standard is actually enabling car manufacturers, charger manufacturers, energy suppliers, grid operators, others, to have a common language so that cars and chargers and how it works will be interoperable. Which means that everything will talk the same language, everything will have the same charger, the same physical gun. And that means that we can start to get a lot more value from being able to speak to and see how much energy is in that battery on wheels, and where is it, and how can we access it. So that's the vision of the future, this digitally enabled ecosystem that's going to come in the next few years.
Actually, that in itself was a problem, or is a problem. The early EVs from the Japanese OEMs all followed this Chademo standard, but then actually that wasn't adopted by the other car manufacturers elsewhere in the world. Tesla had their own plugs and standards to start with. The Germans all did their own thing. The Japanese were different. And today, I mean, even the Renault, it's different to Nissan, even though they're in effect the same company. And Renault is actually different sort of to pretty much everyone else because they've got the chameleon chargers, so they can do much higher power AC charging, but on certain model years of cars. So one of the problems that we've had in the EV world is this sort of spread of different standards and technologies for connecting power, connecting to the car and doing charging and stuff like that. It's going to make life a lot easier in the future for doing vehicle to grid or just simple smart charging if everything's on a common standard, which is now, is it the law now, or do they still? I don't actually know if do Nissan still sell cars with Chademo, or are they all?
They do.
They do. Okay, so they're not quite all.
They do. So it's a really fascinating one, and that's a brilliant potted history of what's been happening over the last few years. I think for people listening, maybe it's making you think about mobile phone chargers. Like really kind of similar, like there's been this proliferation for 15, 20 years of different charging standards and then certain brands bringing out a completely new standard. So now none of your chargers work. And actually, Europe saying, okay, USB-C, that's what we're doing. So do that. Kind of similar. Definitely now we're settling on Type 2 in UK, Europe, a lot of the world. America, they have Type 1. So they have a slight variation, but it's similar. But both with that 2 DC pins underneath, which will turn it into what we call the CCS connector. Actually, a bit on Chademo. I don't know if you'll indulge me. I'll tell you a bit about where Chademo came from. So you mentioned that Chademo, Japanese manufacturers use Chademo and bring Chademo. And actually, you're right. The Nissan Leaf is the only vehicle in the UK now you can buy that has a Chademo connector.
Right. Okay.
Actually, it was a technology that was coming out of Japan when there was an earthquake off the coast of Japan, which caused a Fukushima nuclear reactor disaster. And when that happened, it required the power to be turned down from many of the nuclear reactors in Japan, and Japan is very reliant on nuclear, so a main source of energy. That led to lots of blackouts and brownouts across the country, which obviously very challenging. I mean, for any country, it's very challenging. Japan, very technologically advanced. It was a real challenge for the government to manage that with their sort of civil society, to explain why the power was so challenging at that time. And they put a lot of investment into technologies which would enable the grid to be more resilient, all the way down to a house by house level. And actually, Chademo enabled your vehicle to become your home backup power source. So that was the kind of the origins of why it was sort of invested in and pushed so much. And actually, in Japan, they have a much more mature concept of something called home islanding. So home islanding speaks directly to this potential need to power your house when the whole grid is having a huge challenge. And you can actually disconnect your home from the grid in Japan and power that from your vehicle until such time as the grid is more stable, and you can bring your home back onto the grid. Now that requires, you mentioned bidirectional chargers being a special bit of kit. To take your home off the grid and then put it back on again is another challenge, and an even bigger challenge really, because you have to make sure your home is like harmonized with the grid when you go back on. It is possible. And some people listening might have a Tesla Powerwall with a device which enables you to island your home in the UK. But it's very niche in the UK because we're very lucky we don't have earthquakes, we don't have natural disasters in that way, and our grid is incredibly stable. And blackouts are really, really rare. Even though occasionally a line might go down and then you're out of power for a few hours, it's very rare to be without power for anything longer than that, and anything frequently. So actually the case for home islanding doesn't exist in the UK, although there are early adopters and people out there who like the idea of it. And what I say to them when they ask me, brilliant, vehicle to grid, I can island my home, I can go completely off grid and I can disconnect myself. And I say, well, yes, there are devices that you could have made that you could do that with. Actually, what it enables you to do is actually make your house grid neutral. When you are exporting energy from your car, it goes through your home and goes back out of your smart meter and onto the grid. And in that way, you are actually not taking any energy from the grid at all. So there you go. Bit of origin story about Chademo.
Well, the islanding thing is quite interesting in that, because you're absolutely right. The grid is we're lucky in a way, but then for the only time we need to do that, and it is a sort of a thing with where you've got renewables on your house, but it's sort of the opposite reason, that if someone had to do some maintenance locally on the grid and they took it down, that then your house wasn't putting power back on. It's kind of bypassed where they thought. So this is it G50 something or other, I can't quite remember, but it's like auto islanding standards. So people might have heard the term before, like of islanding, but in the UK it tended to be more important for the opposite reason. But it's
You're
a big
absolutely
thing
right.
globally.
And actually in the UK, in terms of putting energy back on the grid, so anyone who's installed solar panels above 3.68 kilowatt or a home battery, you have applied for, or your installer has applied for, something called G99. So in the UK, one of the reasons our grid is so stable and reliable is that we have a really good visibility and we have a good control over what is allowed onto the grid. And that those G levels, so G99, and actually you might have heard of G98, these are the levels of permission and notification that you need from your distributed network operator, your DNO. Again, they're the ones who, like the cable that comes into your home and connects up into your smart meter, that supply cable, that's the DNOs look after that cable and that supply. And so actually anything below 3.68 kilowatt in size, you don't have to let them know that you're going to export that until after you fitted it. So a lot of domestic solar is below that level for good reason, because it's a much simpler process. With vehicle to grid, where the car is able to do, the Nissan Leaf can do 6.6 kilowatt, but a nominal 7 is what we talk about. And actually that's high enough that you need this higher permission G99, and that means you have to actually follow a particular process of giving information, data, and getting permission to put that energy back on the grid. And that's a whole other part of the project that we spent a lot of time exploring, working with UKPN to understand that process was so difficult when we started the project, because actually most people aren't putting, or weren't at that time, putting big solar arrays on their roofs and putting big batteries in. And so that permission was mostly used for quite large scale things, like a large scale solar farm,
Yeah.
or actually, actually power stations. So
Yeah.
we've worked with them, and they've developed something called Smart Connect, which is a really simple, streamlined way of asking for permission to put these devices on the grid. They've actually called out vehicle to grid as an asset class on its own, so it's separate from a solar panel, different to a battery. And they are also digitizing their own process, and they're taking information from their systems to try and make the process smoother and easier. And I really want to, praise what they've done, and it's great working with them on the project, because that is an exemplar which is being shared with all the other DNOs as a way of best practice.
Yeah.
And actually, we're now working with them around heat pumps. So we're trying to improve the way that the heat pump permissions are done through Smart Connect, again, as an exemplar to the rest of the industry, to make it easier and simpler. Because actually, doing this at scale means that hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe as individuals, maybe through installers, will be requesting permission to connect different devices to the grid. And again, back to that idea about not a hub and spoke anymore, a massively distributed energy system.
Hopefully thousands and millions of people. Like
Yeah.
it's quite an exciting, I guess, and it's probably a good time to just sort of, because I've just noticed we're running over, and I've got to let you get back to your day job. But the results of your trial for vehicle to grid were really interesting, and you actually achieved an awful lot in that project. So, like, I guess first sort of question is, could you just sort of summarize that, and then the next sort of follow on immediately is, what do you think the future looks like? Like, when do we see vehicle to grid being widely deployed? And beyond trials. So how did yours go, and what happens next?
Well, how did it go? It was hugely challenging. It just proved all the things that I mentioned earlier. You're building new technology to build a new service with customers who've never experienced this before. So it was very successful in terms of the amount we learned, the amount we improved, the amount we changed. In terms of the results, we found that customers were really engaged with vehicle to grid, and actually they understood the reasons why they were doing it to help the grid, but we also rewarded them through their tariff. So we gave them a tariff which would be really cheap for them to bring energy in, and would reward them and pay them into their energy bill when they exported energy out. And we automated the whole thing. So we found that they really liked that. They were very engaged, even though honestly, there were some pretty bumpy times for those individuals, things that we did accidentally. When you're doing an innovation trial, they were living and breathing it with us. So we're very grateful to them for sticking with us. And in terms of the way that the system has worked, and the way that the automated scheduling, and working with Crack and Flex now, we work with different partners on the project, and now we're doing it Crack and Flex. We've proved that you can send those signals reliably to make a difference to the grid at that scale. So that was a huge learning for us, and a huge kind of win for the project. I think the final thing is, the thing I always get asked that you haven't asked me, so I'm gonna chuck it in myself.
Go on, guess.
Battery degradation. Battery
okay,
degradation.
Yeah, sorry.
Isn't it going to ruin the battery? No, don't be sorry at all. Like, isn't it going to ruin the battery?
Yeah.
And we knew conceptually that when you do vehicle to grid and you export energy out of the battery, we do it in a really controlled way, in a very smooth way, very considered over many hours.
Yeah.
And actually, the car is stationary, not having to drive around and get hot. That battery is in a really kind of good condition. And in our minds, we were contrasting that with how a car is driven, and how that battery is having to provide energy in a really kind of spiky way, often in town, particularly stop, start the lights, the roundabouts, you're getting faster, you're stopping. Then motorways, it's driving a long way, getting hot.
Yeah.
So actually, for the battery, sitting on your drive is a much nicer life doing vehicle to grid than actually being driven around. So we knew that kind of conceptually. And actually, anecdotally, from our project, we're not a scientific study at a university, and those are being done now. And there are some really interesting studies, being done right now into battery degradation with vehicle to grid. But anecdotally, out of our of our project, we found that actually these batteries are in incredibly good condition when we assess them. And as an example, I had a leaf at my house, so I had the system at my house as well. So I've been doing all the
You walk the
hands-on
walk.
testing.
Yeah.
I do. I wouldn't want to do something to a customer I wouldn't want to do to myself. And so I've also
Brilliant.
been the one who's woken up to the car not quite charged how I wanted it to be, because we've done something, we're learning and innovating. So yeah, I've lived that dream, and it has been a dream actually. It's amazing. My children absolutely adore it. They get really excited when the purple light comes on. That means that the car's powering the house. Anyway, so I had that car assessed after about 18 months, and the battery is in actually, according to the Nissan assessment at the dealership, it's in kind of perfect condition. So it's got 12 bars on a Nissan Leaf. So any Leaf drivers will know 12 bars is the holy grail.
Yeah.
That's where you want it to be. So we're really excited by that, because it's showing that what we're doing under vehicle to grid is fine for the battery.
Yeah.
Nissan also guaranteed their warranty, and we lease our cars to customers, so there's no risk on the customer, but that also gives me confidence. And actually that brings me on to the second part of your question, to answer what's going to happen in the future. So to take the battery degradation question mark forward, spoiler alert, no, doesn't degrade the battery in a concerning way. Many vehicle manufacturers are starting to talk about the vehicle to grid systems that they are releasing soon.
Right.
Their warranties will cover this behavior, and those cars are the likes of the Ioniq 5, Kia EV6, Genesis series, family of cars, Honda E. We know we've already done some trials around vehicle to grid. We know that others are coming. VW, so VW announced a couple of months ago that they are going to be doing vehicle to grid. They're going to push a software update apparently towards the end of the year. So keep your eyes peeled if you've got an ID3 and ID4. So it's coming. It's coming really soon. And as a company, we're really excited that we've built a working V2G service, which customers will be able to access. And we will be working really hard. And we do talk to the vehicle manufacturers and to the charger manufacturers to see how this CCS enabled technology is going to develop and evolve, so that we can make sure that those are also part of our ecosystem, so we can bring vehicle to grid as part of Intelligent Octopus, and just keep on expanding what Intelligent Octopus can do. And I should also say, Intelligent Octopus will expand to heat pumps and to solar and battery systems as well, so that whatever energy generating and storing devices you have, will be able to offer you a tariff and a service which brings that all together.
Okay, cool. One sort of, I guess, a final question on the vehicle to grid becoming more kind of widely deployed. Do you, you're far closer to this, do you see the manufacturers bringing it on vehicle, or do you think you're always going to need that more sophisticated wall box converter? What do you see happening there? Is it going to be hardware, wall hardware, or car hardware?
Ryan, you've saved the killer question for last. Yes, no, maybe both. So at the moment, I know of manufacturers who are leaning towards onboard inverter, which would mean an AC bidirectional charger. So actually upgrading the power electronics in the design of an AC charger, which would make it probably cheaper and simpler for customers to get a new charger, because the inversion will happen on the battery itself in the vehicle. And I know of other brands and makes that are going towards the off-board inverter, which means you'll need a more complicated bidirectional charger on the wall at home. They are at the moment not available for Chademo like at retail, so you can't buy a wallbox Quasar. And there's another one at Indra, V2G charger, Chademo charger. You can't buy those at the moment because they're so I guess so niche,
specialist,
and they're very expensive because they've had to invest in building them and designing them. My hope is that because these V2G systems will become much more widespread, many more brands, actually the manufacturers will be able to make those bidirectional inverter style chargers more cheaply, because there'll be a high demand for them, and they will be able to sell them at a higher volume. So I'm afraid we've gone from one VHS Betamax battle between Chademo and CCS. Looks like CCS is winning for most of the world. We're about to go, I think, into another phase of seeing whether the V2G technology will go onboard or offboard inverter. So absolute killer question, and I'm watching it super closely in my role as sort of Director of Tech and Innovation. And I will do as much as I can to keep my ear to the ground so that we are there for customers to have the solutions when these systems come to market.
Brilliant. Well, and on that's probably a good point to bring the podcast to a close. So thanks so much for agreeing to do this. It's been absolutely fascinating. I really enjoyed the talk that you did at the PDIM conference a few weeks ago. So and hopefully we've captured some of that in the podcast. And the whole sort of topic of energy costs and managing demand is so topical at the moment. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. So it's really exciting to see you guys. We're well ahead of the curve on this, and hopefully that'll start to bring things into the market in the not too distant. So really good, really good. Thank you.